I grew up in a world where the map of power was drawn in permanent ink. If you wanted stability in the Middle East, you looked to Washington. If you wanted to move oil, you followed the American security umbrella. But lately, standing here in the heart of the Gulf, I've started to see the ink smudge. There's a new architect in town, and they aren't carrying a heavy stick or a lecture on democracy. They're carrying a blueprint for a high-speed rail and a digital currency. I remember watching the news a few years ago thinking China was just a customer, the world's biggest buyer of oil. But that's old thinking. Now, I see Beijing rewriting the entire diplomatic script. They aren't just buying our energy anymore. They are building our future cities, our 5G networks, and most shockingly, brokering the peace deals that we all thought were impossible. It's a new axis of convenience, and it's shifting the global balance of power right under our feet. For decades, we were told that you had to pick a side. You were either with the West or you were left behind. But Beijing just offered a third door. I've been tracking their movements, from the secret meetings in Riyadh to the trade hubs in Tehran. And what I've found is a strategy so subtle yet so aggressive. It makes the old Cold War look like a schoolyard game. This isn't just about trade. It's about a total reimagining of who runs the world's most volatile region. It started with a phone call that caught the entire world off guard. For years, the rivalry between Saudi Arabia and Iran was the defining fault line of the Middle East, a Cold War that seemed destined to last forever. We all expected the breakthrough, if it ever came, to happen in a boardroom in Geneva or at a summit in D.C., but instead, the images that flashed across my screen showed something else. Top officials from both nations standing in Beijing, shaking hands under the watchful eye of Chinese diplomats. This was the moment the American era in the region felt a sudden chill. China didn't use threats or military leverage to get them to the table. They used something much more persuasive, the promise of uninterrupted business. As I dug deeper into the mechanics of this deal, I realized Beijing wasn't playing the role of the world's policeman. They were acting as the world's project manager. They made it clear that conflict is bad for the bottom line, and in a world where China is your biggest customer, their bottom line is your priority. It was a masterclass in quiet diplomacy, proving that Beijing can now offer the one thing Washington has struggled to maintain lately: actual results without the political baggage. But the diplomacy didn't stop with a handshake. I began to notice something deeper happening in the infrastructure of our daily lives. While the West was focused on traditional military alliances, Beijing was busy laying down the digital Silk Road. I walked through the tech hubs of Dubai and Riyadh and saw it everywhere: Huawei 5G towers, Chinese-made surveillance systems, and cloud computing centers that run on Eastern code. It's a level of integration that goes far beyond just selling hardware. I realized that China isn't just building bridges, they are building the operating system for the modern Middle East. By embedding their technology into the very fabric of these nations, they've created a dependency that is almost impossible to unplug. It's brilliant, really. They aren't asking for military bases, they are asking for data ports. For the leaders here, it's a dream come true. World-class technology without the constant lectures on human rights or political reform. This axis of convenience is fueled by a mutual understanding. Beijing wants secure energy and trade routes, and the Middle East wants a modernized economy that doesn't rely on the whims of a changing administration in Washington. Every time a new smart city rises from the desert sand, it's increasingly being built with Chinese silicon. We are witnessing a shift where the Standard Oil era is being replaced by the Standard Code era, and for the first time in a century, the code isn't written in English. As I looked closer at the ledgers, I saw the most dangerous move of all: the attack on the petrodollar. For as long as I can remember, the deal was simple. The world buys oil in US dollars, and in return, the US guarantees the security of the flow. It was the bedrock of global finance. But now, I'm seeing cracks in that foundation. I've watched as Beijing began whispering a new proposal to its partners. Why use a third party's currency when we can deal directly? The shift is subtle, but seismic. When I see Saudi Arabia considering the Yuan for oil sales, I'm not just looking at a currency exchange, I'm looking at the dismantling of a century-old financial empire. China is positioning itself as the ultimate alternative. They are offering a financial safety net that is immune to Western sanctions. To the leaders I've followed in the region, this isn't about ideology. It's about survival. They saw what happened when Russia was cut off from the global banking system, and they decided they never wanted to be that vulnerable. Beijing is playing a long game, turning the Middle East into a massive laboratory for a post-dollar world. By linking their economies through the axis of convenience, they are creating a closed loop where energy flows east and technology flows west, leaving the old guard on the outside looking in. This isn't just a trade pivot. It's a total rewiring of the global power grid, and the switch is being flipped in Beijing. What haunts me most about this shift is the silence where the thunder used to be. For decades, the presence of a U.S. carrier strike group in the Persian Gulf was the ultimate period at the end of any geopolitical sentence. But as I look at the horizon now, I see a different kind of presence. It's not a fleet of ships. It's a web of joint military drills and sophisticated drone factories. Beijing is doing the unthinkable. They are entering the security sphere without ever declaring a war on terror or occupying a single square inch of sand. I've watched as countries that were once exclusively armed by the West are now unboxing Chinese-made reconnaissance drones and ballistic missile components. It's a genius, no-strings-attached policy. When I talk to analysts about this, the consensus is clear. China is providing the hardware of security without the headache of a formal alliance. They aren't promising to die for Riyadh or Abu Dhabi, but they are giving them the tools to defend themselves. And in the process, they are making it so the Middle East no longer needs to ask for permission from Washington before it acts. This is the final piece of the puzzle. By filling the vacuum left by a pivoting West, Beijing has created a reality where they are indispensable. They've managed to become the primary customer, the lead architect, the digital backbone, and now the silent armorer. I see a region that is no longer tilting east. It has arrived. The axis of convenience has solidified into a new world order, where the rules aren't written in the halls of Congress, but in the quiet, calculated boardrooms of Beijing. The map hasn't just been smudged, it's been completely redrawn, and there's no going back to the way things were. I used to think of global power as a single spotlight, moving from one empire to the next. But standing here today, I realize the stage has changed entirely. We aren't moving from one superpower to another. We are entering an era of the great diversification. The leaders I track in the Middle East aren't looking to trade one master for another. They've realized that in this new axis, they can finally play both sides to their own advantage. It's a chillingly efficient reality. While the West is busy debating values and drawing lines in the sand, China is busy building the sand into silicon chips and high-speed rails. I see a future where the Middle East acts as the ultimate bridge, a neutral zone where the world's energy meets the world's factory. But there's a catch. By choosing this axis of convenience, these nations are betting everything on the stability of Beijing. If the Chinese engine slows down, the entire region feels the friction. As I look at the new skyline of Riyadh or the tech parks in Cairo, the American influence hasn't vanished, but it's no longer the only voice in the room. The monologue is over. The dialogue has begun. Beijing has successfully rewritten the rules of diplomacy not by winning a war, but by making themselves too useful to ignore. The ink on this new map is finally dry, and as I close my notebook on this journey, one thing is certain: the center of gravity has shifted, and the world we knew is officially a relic of the past. As I stand back and look at the sheer scale of this transformation, I realize there's one more layer I haven't mentioned, the one that makes this axis of convenience almost impossible to break. It's not just about the oil or the tech, it's about the education and the people. For decades, the elite of the Middle East packed their bags and headed to Harvard, Oxford, or Sandhurst. They returned home with Western ideals, Western connections, and a Western worldview. But walk through the departure lounges today, and you'll see a different destination on the boarding passes: Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. I've seen a massive surge in scholarship programs and cultural exchanges that are quietly grooming the next generation of Arab and Persian leaders to think in Mandarin. It's a brilliant, long-term play. By the time the current projects are finished, the people running them won't just be using Chinese tools, they'll be using Chinese logic. I've noticed that while the US is withdrawing its physical presence, China is moving into the hearts and minds of the youth. They are offering a model of authoritarian capitalism that looks very attractive to a young generation that values rapid stability and high-tech convenience over messy democratic processes. The tether is becoming invisible, but it's stronger than any military treaty. I've watched as Chinese universities open branches in the Gulf, and as the One Belt, One Road initiative becomes a mandatory subject in local schools. It's a total immersion. Beijing isn't just winning the contract for the next 5 years. They are winning the loyalty of the next 50. This isn't a temporary pivot based on a bad relationship with a specific US president. It's a fundamental rewiring of the region's DNA. The deeper I go, the more I realize that the West isn't just losing a market, it's losing its relevance. When I talk to the young entrepreneurs here, they don't look at the West as the land of the future anymore. They look at it as a legacy system that's slow, divided, and unreliable. To them, the East is where the light is coming from. The axis of convenience has evolved into a shared destiny, and by the time we realize how deep these roots go, it'll be too late to pull them up. The world hasn't just changed, it's been replaced. As I look closer at the map, I've realized that this isn't just a story about two regions shaking hands. It's about the creation of a fortress Eurasia. For a century, the Middle East was essentially a maritime outpost for the West, a series of ports and pipelines that kept the Atlantic world running. But what Beijing is doing is turning the entire region inward. They are building a massive, interconnected land bridge that bypasses the oceans controlled by the U.S. Navy. I've been following the progress of the pipelines and rail networks stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, and the implication is staggering. The Middle East is no longer an island of Western influence. It's becoming the beating heart of a new Eastern-led supercontinent. I saw a report recently about the International North-South Transport Corridor, and it clicked. This isn't just about convenience, it's about immunity. By linking the Middle East directly to Russia and China via land, Beijing is making sure that Western sanctions or naval blockades will eventually become obsolete. I've watched as billions of dollars in dark infrastructure are laid down, fiber optic cables that don't touch Western servers, and trade routes that don't use Western ports. It's a shadow world being built in broad daylight. When I talk to people on the ground, there is a sense that the old rules-based order was a game where the house always won, and Beijing just built a brand new casino where the rules are still being written. But there's a heavy price for this new alliance that nobody seems to be talking about yet. By trading the American umbrella for the Chinese blueprint, these nations are entering a different kind of contract. Beijing doesn't care about your internal politics, sure, but they also don't offer the kind of security guarantees that have kept the peace for 70 years. I see a high-stakes gamble taking place. The Middle East is betting that economic integration will prevent war, while the West warns that without a clear policeman, the region could spiral into chaos. As I stand at this crossroads, looking at the gleaming skyscrapers funded by Eastern capital and the silent high-tech surveillance grids watching every street corner, I can't help but feel that we've traded a loud, messy superpower for a quiet, efficient one. The axis of convenience is now a permanent fixture of our reality. It's a world where the dollar is a memory, the internet is divided, and the path to power leads directly to the Forbidden City. The transition isn't coming, it's finished. And as the sun sets over the Gulf, it's not the stars and stripes I see reflected in the water, but the glow of a new crimson horizon. What keeps me awake at night is the realization that this convenience might eventually become a cage. I've been looking at the debt structures and the long-term leases being signed behind closed doors, and a pattern is emerging that looks less like a partnership and more like a takeover. When I see strategic ports in the region being managed by Chinese state-owned firms for the next 99 years, I realize that Beijing isn't just renting space. They are buying the geography itself. It's a debt-trap diplomacy that I've seen play out in Africa and South Asia. But here, the stakes are 1,000,000 times higher because the world's energy supply is the collateral. I've watched as local leaders boast about their sovereignty and their independence from Western pressure, but as I dig into the fine print, I see a different story. If a nation in the Middle East defaults on these massive infrastructure loans, or if they decide to pivot back to the West, Beijing holds the keys to their power grids, their transport networks, and their digital clouds. I'm seeing a world where you don't need to fire a single shot to occupy a country. You just need to own its data and its debt. It's a silent conquest, and by the time these nations realize they've traded their autonomy for a high-speed rail line, the axis will have locked into place. The most chilling part of this journey has been seeing how the silence of the West is being interpreted. In the markets of Cairo and the boardrooms of Doha, the American withdrawal is seen as a sign of terminal decline. I've heard it said that the West is a sunset power, while China is the noonday sun. This perception is more powerful than any reality. It's driving a gold rush toward the East that is stripping the Middle East of its traditional alliances. People are no longer asking if they should join this new axis, but how fast they can get in before the door closes. As I look at the final piece of this geopolitical puzzle, I see a Middle East that has become the front line of a new kind of war, one fought with algorithms, currencies, and construction cranes. This new axis isn't just rewriting diplomacy, it's rewriting what it means to be a nation in the 21st century. The convenience was the hook, the technology was the line, and now the sinker is dropping. We are standing on the edge of a future where the Middle East is the central hub of a world that no longer speaks to Washington. The script has been flipped, the actors have changed, and the curtain is finally coming down on the world I once knew. The new axis isn't just a trend, it is the new gravity of our planet. As I reflect on this entire shift, I'm struck by the most profound change of all: the total removal of the moral compass from international relations. For better or worse, the American era was defined by a certain set of expectations, demands for transparency, human rights, and democratic ideals. They weren't always met, but they were always on the table. But as I walk through the corridors of power today, that language has vanished. Beijing's axis of convenience operates on a cold, hard logic of absolute non-interference. It's a no questions asked policy that is as liberating as it is terrifying. I've seen how this changes the soul of a region. When there is no pressure to reform, the status quo becomes set in stone. I've watched as surveillance technology, perfected in Xinjiang, is exported to Middle Eastern capitals, giving leaders the tools to monitor their populations with a precision that was once the stuff of science fiction. It's a perfect synchronization. Beijing gets the stability it needs to keep the oil flowing and the goods moving, and local regimes get the high-tech armor they need to ensure they never face an Arab Spring again. The convenience isn't just for the economy, it's for the preservation of power. I used to think that the world would inevitably move toward more openness, but standing here, I realize that Beijing has provided a viable, high-tech alternative to that dream. They've proven that you can have 21st century prosperity with 14th century control. This realization is what finally breaks the old world order. It's not just a trade deal, it's a philosophical divorce. The Middle East is no longer looking west for a model of how to live. They are looking east for a model of how to rule. As I wrap up my investigation into this new axis, I see a landscape that is unrecognizable from the one I knew just a decade ago. The American bases are still there, the Western brands still line the malls, but the pulse of the region has moved. It's a phantom presence now. The real decisions, the real growth, and the real future are being navigated through a network of undersea cables and desert railways that lead straight to the heart of China. We've entered a world where convenience is the new currency, and in that market, Beijing is the only bank in town. The transition is over. The new era doesn't belong to the brave or the free, it belongs to the efficient. And as the final pieces of this geopolitical puzzle click into place, I realize that the map wasn't just redrawn. It was replaced by a digital screen, and someone in Beijing just hit refresh. As I look out over the horizon of this transformed landscape, I'm haunted by the historical irony of it all. For centuries, the Middle East was the center of the Silk Road, the bridge between worlds. Then came the era of Western dominance, where the region was sliced up into spheres of influence by empires that looked at this land as a prize to be won or a gas station to be guarded. I used to think we had moved past that we were heading toward a future of true regional independence. But standing here now, I realize we've simply entered a more sophisticated version of the same old game. Only this time, the empire doesn't send governors. It sends software updates and infrastructure loans. I've spent months following the trail of these new alliances, and the most startling discovery is the sense of inevitability I find in every office and every street corner. There's a feeling that the West is a tired athlete, gasping for air and arguing with itself on the sidelines, while China is the fresh competitor, focused and relentless. When I talk to the engineers building the new green hydrogen plants or the bankers settling trades in digital Yuan, they don't see themselves as pawns in a new Cold War. They see themselves as the winners of a global Great Reset. They've bypassed the old gatekeepers of the IMF and the World Bank, and they've found a partner that speaks the language of the future, even if that language is written in a code they don't fully control. But there is a lingering question that no one seems willing to answer. What happens when the interests of the Middle East and the interests of Beijing finally collide? Because they will. History tells us that every axis of convenience eventually faces a moment of truth. Right now, it's all smiles and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But what happens when Beijing's demand for cheap energy clashes with the region's need for high prices? What happens when a local conflict threatens a Chinese-owned port? We are entering uncharted territory where the safety net is gone. The U.S. might have been a frustrating and often hypocritical partner, but it was a predictable one. Beijing is a black box. This is the moment I realized that the axis of convenience isn't just a new chapter in a history book, it's the final sentence of the one we've been reading since 1945. For years, we looked for the Big Bang moment, the singular explosion that would signal the end of the old world. But as I stand here today, I see that the revolution didn't come with the sound of a gun. It came with the soft, rhythmic hum of a Chinese high-speed train cutting through the Arabian desert and the silent ping of a digital transaction that bypassed New York entirely. I look at the map now, and I don't see the lines Washington drew in the sand. I see a web of fiber optic cables and deep-water ports that all converge at a single point in the east. The trap, if you want to call it that, has already snapped shut. It was built with our own desire for speed, for luxury, and for a world without the messy lectures of the past. We didn't just walk into this new era, we ran into it, blinded by the neon lights of Beijing's promises. There's a chilling stillness in the air. The American carriers are still out there, floating like ghosts of a century that has already ended, while the real power moves at the speed of light through the digital Silk Road. I've come to understand that Beijing didn't just win the game, they changed the board, the pieces, and the rules while the rest of the world was still playing by a manual from the 90s. As the sun sets over this new landscape, a cold reality sets in. The axis of convenience was never about partnership. It was about gravity. Beijing has become the sun, and the Middle East, and soon perhaps the rest of us, has become a planet locked in its orbit. There is no opting out anymore. The infrastructure is laid, the debt is signed, and the code is written. We are no longer watching the shift happen. We are living in the aftermath. The West didn't lose the Middle East in a war. It lost it in a boardroom over a handshake and under the cover of a convenience that has now become our permanent reality. The lights are changing, the script is flipped, and for the first time in 100 years, the world is moving forward without asking us for permission.